Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Hosea, the 12th chapter, just continuing from where we left off, as Hosea continues to prophesy against Israel. And as we see here, periodically there's mention of Judah and some things that pertain to the nation as a whole. All right, because though you had more righteous kings in Judah, right, of the southern kingdom than you did of the northern kingdom, all in all, you still had wickedness going on in the southern kingdom, right? It wasn't all of them that were righteous. Neither was it all the people that followed those ways. So this is Hosea chapter 12, verse 1. Ephraim feedeth on wind, and followeth after the east wind. He daily increaseth lies and desolation. Now, Ephraim feeding on wind, right? Obviously, it's a metaphorical statement, but what it means is they basically chase after vanity. Okay, they dwell upon things that are vain and hold no substance, similar to like the wind, right? It says here, and followeth after the east wind. Now, the east wind was usually destructive, okay, and the Lord would send that to damage your crops, bring a locust or some form of destruction there. So in other words, right, they chase after, vanity, all right, and the ways in which they go, all right, is after destruction. And the way this metaphor relates is that similar to following after the east wind, when you go in the way of idolatry and the wicked deeds that Israelites were doing at this time, it's like you're chasing after destruction, because that is what's going to be at the end of that path that you're going down. He daily increaseth lies and desolation, and they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt. And so, as it says, he daily increaseth lies and desolation, meaning that this wickedness, right, was like a norm. And continually it would happen day by day by day. And over time, it gets worse and worse, right? People figure out if it's defrauding your neighbor or scamming, they figure out more elusive ways or deceptive ways to do it. If it starts with just threatening somebody, the next day it might be actually committing murder, right? So it just keeps on going up and up and up. If it starts by committing adultery and feeling a little bit guilty about it, the more they do it, it just becomes, they become more brazen and bold about it. So they continually increase in, as it says, lies and desolation, similar to chasing after the east wind. The desolation that they're increasing in is pretty much the return or the judgment that will come upon them for those wicked deeds that they were committing. And they do make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried into Egypt, which is to say that they would seek, right, throughout the various reigns by the different kings, they would seek alliances or security from either the Assyrians, sometimes from the Egyptians, rather than putting their faith and trust in the Lord. Verse 2, the Lord Yahweh hath also a controversy with Judah, and will punish Jacob according to his ways. So here there's mention of the controversy the Lord has with Judah. Now, as we read in the book of 2 Chronicles, there were times where the Lord was upset at the kings of Judah because they joined or they had an affinity with the kings of Israel. I remember there's one, I believe, during the time of Ahab, okay, in which the Lord was upset. I believe it was either with Jehoshaphat or his son. And I forget the exact king, but when you go through the series, right, we went through the whole book of 2 Kings or 2 Chronicles, you'll see there's a chapter in there that mentions the southern kingdom were invited to go, or I think they were trying to go on a voyage joined with the northern kingdom, and the Lord had their ships being broken up at Ezion Geber because he wasn't in agreement with that. Okay. And the Lord did send prophets to openly reprove those kings of Judah that did that. But nonetheless, there was still wickedness going on in the land of Judah as well, right? So they weren't exempt. So here it mentions the Lord also has a problem with Judah. And then, as it says, I will punish Jacob according to his ways. So now, you start with the northern kingdom, which like the dominant tribe was Ephraim. So that's why they're mentioned, but they represent the whole northern kingdom. And then you have the southern kingdom, Judah. And then you zoom out a bit, and then you go up to really the national level, which is where it mentions Jacob, because Jacob represents the nation, right? Jacob being interchangeable with Israel, right? The man Jacob, which was the forefather of the 12 tribes, his name got changed to Israel. So sometimes you hear mention of, and it's interesting, or it's rather good that they mention Jacob here, because in prior chapters, the northern kingdom is sometimes referred to as Israel and sometimes referred to as Ephraim. Okay, so here it's clear that we're referring to, when the Lord says, I'm going to punish Jacob, obviously he's not punishing the man Jacob, all right, but he's punishing his descendants, which would be the nation here. As it says, according to his ways, all right, according to his doings, will he recompense him. And that is why above it mentions they increase in lies and desolation. The desolation would be the recompense. Verse 3, he took his brother. So now Hosea, as he's speaking, right, he makes reference here to, in a couple of these verses, he makes reference historically to the life of our forefather Jacob, and then comes back to this time and then makes a couple of references here. All right. So as we're going through the book of Hosea, it's broken up into book, chapter, verse now. But back then it was writings, right? It was like a scroll. Similar to today. In fact, prior to live streams, right? Before, I think before YouTube came out with live streams, or before it started to become more widely adopted, I should say, when we would do the street speaking, we would record it, right, and break it up into parts. So we would upload part 1, part 2, part 3, so on and so forth. And you would watch it in parts, right? And you may be watching part 5, and within part 5 is contained whatever we were speaking about for that 30 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour. So sometimes it may be that there's 3 parts, but they're all part of the one day, right? Or one street speaking. And similarly, when you read the writings, just because we're in the 12th chapter of Hosea doesn't mean that this was like 12 separate days, right, in which Hosea went and spoke, or 12 separate occasions. Right? Sometimes the first 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes even the whole book, might have been either at one point in which he was saying all these things, or like a summation of the message that he had during his ministry. All right, so just a bit of, extra information there. Anyway, coming back to verse 3, it says, he took his brother by the heel in the womb, referring to Jacob, that is, and by his strength, he had power with God. So that's why when you go back to the book of Genesis, it mentions Esau comes out first, and Jacob's hand held onto the heel of Esau. And as it says, and by his strength, he had power with God, which it now emphasizes. Remember that there's that colon. As it says, yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. And when you, once again, you go back to the book of Genesis and you read about the story of our forefather Jacob, there was a point in time where he did wrestle with an angel, okay, and ended up, as it says, he prevailed. That's why I said he had power over the angel. He wept and made supplication unto him, which is in reference to Jacob's refusal to let the angel go, save he got a blessing from him. And that's when he got his name changed to Israel. He found him in Bethel, and there he spake with us. And once again, going back to the history, you'll see that the Most High appeared to Jacob in Bethel, right? And that's where he had that dream about the ladder. You have the saying Jacob's ladder. I believe it was over there in Bethel, in which the Lord appeared to him. So on his way, fleeing from Esau, going to Syria, the Lord came to him and told him, look, I'm the God of your forefathers, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Abraham and Isaac. And Jacob says, well, if you are my God, right? Roughly paraphrasing, should my memory serve me right, protect me and take me all throughout. And on my way back, which Jacob ended up doing, he builds an altar there and sacrifice to the Lord. So verse 5, it says here, even the Lord Yahweh of hosts, the Lord or Yahweh is his memorial. And when you go into that word memorial, is zakar, which is to remember, right? And so the name Yahweh, right, is the name by which we will remember or know the Lord. Verse 6, therefore turn thou to thy God, and keep mercy and judgment, and wait on thy God continually. Right? So he's calling to remembrance. This is the God that came to our forefather Jacob, that spake with him, that blessed him, right? This is that same God. So turn back to him. Verse 7. Now, verse 7, the pronoun here, right? The he is not referring to the Most High. Okay, even though the context, right, in 5, 5, and 6 talks about the Lord, verse 7 is not dealing with Israel again. So as it says, he is a merchant. The balances of deceit are in his hand. He loveth to oppress. And it is more than likely referring to Ephraim here as it continues in the 8th verse. But what it's saying here is like a merchant sells things, right? But here they are selling with deceit. The balances of deceit are the actual like physical balances, the weights, you would say, in which if you look up how they measure things in the ancient world, today the symbol of like a court or a judge is like a balance, right? Where you have a plate on one side, a plate on the other side. You place one thing on one side, you place the weights on the other side, and then they sort of balance out. But as it says here, the balances of deceit are in his hand. So they would either be using unjust weights or some underhanded methods to where they could make more money off of the people. And as it says, he loveth to oppress, which this would be an example. Verse 8, and Ephraim said, yet am I become rich. I have found me out substance. In all my labors they shall find none iniquity in me that were sin. In other words, they are of the thought that they will not get caught, right? I'm doing all this, right? I've become very rich. This has been very lucrative for me, and yet nobody can prove or show that I was sinning or that I was committing iniquity. And that is not to say that they weren't, but rather that they thought that they would not be found out. Okay? It's like when somebody scams you or cheats, and then you're like, yo, what are you doing? And they're like, look, you can check me. I didn't do nothing. Like, I'm good, bro. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, there's nothing you have on me, or there's nothing you can get on me. Verse 9, and I am that Lord Yahweh, thy God from the land of Egypt, or Salaki, and I that am the Lord Yahweh thy God from the land of Egypt, will yet make thee to dwell in tabernacles, as in the days of the solemn feast. Right? So, and that being the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, when we dwelt in tabernacles in the ancient world, or before, it was really because we were in the wilderness, right? We had nothing else, so we dwelt there in tabernacles. But the Lord is saying that pretty much I'm going to put you back into a state like that, similar to what you do during the Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 10, I have also spoken by the prophets, and I have multiplied visions, and used similitudes by the ministry of the prophets. So the similitudes or the semblance or examples by the ministry of the prophets, in fact, the book of Hosea, his ministry was an example of a similitude, right? The Lord told him to go and marry a harlot and to have children with them, and to call them by certain names. That was a similitude to represent the relationship between the Lord and Israel. Okay, similar to how the Lord told Isaiah to prophesy naked, similar to how the Lord told Ezekiel he would kill his wife and ended up doing that, and that Ezekiel couldn't mourn. These were examples of the ministry of the prophets being used as similitudes to represent either some state that Israel would go into, or the state in which the relationship of the Most High and the nation was. Verse 11, is there iniquity in Gilead? Surely they are vanity. So that's a rhetorical question, right? To say, surely they are vanity. They sacrifice bullocks in Gilgal. Yea, their altars are as heaps in the furrows of the fields. Now, the furrows, right, as we went into in a previous chapter, if you look up here, farmers furrows. So it's these lines, right? These rows that are broken up, right, by the plow within the ground for planting. And the reason it mentions their altars being like heaps in the furrows of the fields is like how basically they have these altars in which they sacrifice onto these idols everywhere. There are altars everywhere, like how you would find stones in the furrows. So as the plowman is, creating those furrows, they often come across some rocks, stones here and there, and they have to remove them to make space so they can plant accordingly. So similar to how you pretty much see those heaps or those stones everywhere when creating those furrows, is like how if you went to these locations in Israel, you would see those idols, those altars everywhere where they sacrifice onto these gods. And Jacob fled into the country of Syria. So now he goes back, right, to the time of Jacob, right? He fled into the country of Syria, which is Aram, where Rebekah's brother, right, Laban was. And as it says, and Israel served for a wife. It's the same, right? It's just using the term Jacob and Israel interchangeably, right? So he ended up fleeing to Syria. He served there, right? It says, and for a wife, he kept sheep. So that wife being Rachel, he ended up getting Leah as well. But he served Laban so that he would he basically worked the wages to be able to earn one of the daughters of Laban that he really wanted, which was Rachel. But he ended up having to, serve for both of them because Laban basically tricked him. And that account is in the book of Genesis. You can go and read up on that if you're not familiar with that story. Verse 13, and by a prophet, the Lord Yahweh brought Israel out of Egypt, right? That prophet being Moses. And by a prophet, he was preserved, right? So by the Lord using Moses, he delivered Israel out of Egypt and also preserved them in the wilderness. Ephraim provoked him to anger most bitterly. Therefore shall he leave his blood upon him, and his reproach shall his Lord return unto him. So in concluding this message, Hosea is basically saying here that Ephraim, they pissed off the Lord so bad, he will not acquit them. So by leaving their blood upon them, he's leaving that guilt upon them and not acquitting them of it. And therefore, he's going to reproach, or he's going to return that reproach or that judgment or consequence onto them for it. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the book of Hosea, the 12th chapter. So Lord willing, you were edified. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.